So welcome everybody. This is Susan Koenig's monthly class. Obviously, as you can tell, I'm not Susan Koenig, but I am a big fan and I've been a student of hers for almost 14 years. I've worked together with her on the teaching team. I'm on the board as the vice president of the association, and some of the people who are in class here, I've been honored to be able to be their teacher and assistant through the training. So I hope to live up to what Susan does as a teacher and also offer something new, a new flavor for each of you. So just to give you a quick overview, just to get started with the basics, I have a screen share for you. And I just want you to take a look at this and we'll go through them just so you all remember, because one of the nicest ways to do somatics is to go back and break your old habitual patterns. You think you know how to do arch and flatten, and as soon as you do, you'll get locked into a habitual pattern and you lose some of that openness to newness, the part of it that you don't know. If we knew how to make these changes, we would actually change them on our own, which is great. But when we get stuck, we need to stay open to what we don't know anymore, what we've lost sight of, and that's called sensory motor amnesia. So number one thing is make sure you have a healthy space. I always like to say, have the space that you could do a snow angel in case you want to spread your legs or your arms out or reach out to the sides. It's nice to have that space set up before you get started. Clothing, as you all know, comfortable, bring layers, blankets, because you might get cool, even though you're not cool now, or you might get hot. Take some socks off and maybe your sweatshirt off. And it's good to be comfortable. As Susan always says, it's good to train in comfort, because when we get into discomfort in our daily lives, we tend to override it and keep going. So it's always good to come back to comfort. So when you do have discomfort, you can make a change. Supports, pillows, blankets, pets, anything that you have near you that you may need to be able to prop yourself up. It's good to have extra and more than you think you need, so please bring those supports in close. A chair, we won't need that today, but sometimes you might need a chair. Make sure it's stable. And then the movement principles. These are things you all know, but let's review them. So the speed of your movement is really, really important. The slowness actually moves you into the part of your brain where you can make changes. So in the cerebellum, most movements are habitual and automatic, and thank God, because they help us survive. But when habitual patterns get stuck there and we keep doing it the same way, it can start to cause functional problems. So speed is really important. It moves you into the band between your two ears. So the old time headphones that had a band that would go over top, basically where that band is from ear to ear is your sensory motor cortex. And that's where you make changes. So it's not just that Thomas Hanna said go slowly, just because. It's actually really important to making change. Gently, make sure you move gently as much as you can. Smaller movements are always better. And I tend to do a full movement the first time, a half movement the second time, and work my way down to smaller movements over time so that I can find where I'm stuck versus just dazzle myself with my arm and my leg and my head movements. And then with awareness, as you move, you may think to yourself, at least this is what I do, I have 3 movements to do. So already I'm not present. I'm thinking of the 3 movements. I'm thinking of the next movement. I've already done 1. So bring yourself back to this movement. It is the only movement you are doing and the only movement you will do in this moment. So please return with awareness. And those of you who know this and may be ignoring what I'm saying on some level, come back to these basics, because this is where the magic happens. And then self-regulate. This is taking care of yourself. If you think that you should be able to lay flat, but your head and neck are uncomfortable, but you put a pillow there and it's comfortable, put a pillow there. You can keep checking, you can move it as you need, but make sure that you're comfortable again so that you can train and know what's going on and make the changes you need. And then resting completely. This is something that I missed for many years when I first started doing this. Between each movement, you rest completely as if you are done for the day. So the movement pattern is thinking about the movement, moving into the movement slowly and with control, pausing for a second, slowly releasing with control, and at the end, although it's hard for most of us, completely letting go. Most of us are prepped for the next movement, slightly contracted. Try to find the bottom of each movement if you can. So this is a really nice way for you to start, even though most of you have done this before. Go ahead and find your way to the floor, laying on your back, face towards the ceiling. Get comfortable. This is a variation on the first class, movement class, that Thomas Hanna taught to his Wave 1 students. Phil Schenk and Susan both confirmed that this was the first official class that Thomas taught, and it's really nice to go back to basics. Once you found your way to the floor, the first thing to do is realize that for most of us, there's a lot between us and this moment. Our thoughts, our plans, our worries, our fears, anything that's coming up for us that's between us usually starts in our mind. So dropping down out of the mind, moving into your body, noticing what you feel. And this whole class is going to be focused on direct experience. Not what you think it should be, not what it has been in the past, not what you hope it to be in the future, but just the movement that you're doing now. As you lay there, scan through and do what I call the Goldilocks scan. Where are you uncomfortable, even if it's a little bit? Notice it. This is a great time to reconnect. There's a difference between your mind and your brain. Moving into your brain, moving into your body, realizing that there's no separation and that there's only this. Breath is a really nice way to come back. So noticing your breathing. You don't have to change it. It doesn't have to be a system that you've done before. Just notice. In Hanna Somatic Education, you are the expert that has forgotten. This is a sort of remembering. By doing, you have a conversation with your body. You ask it a question by moving, and it gives you an immediate answer with feedback. Where are you moving? How are you moving? Is it comfortable? Is it limited? Notice. Part of us may get a little antsy, want things to begin, but they've already begun. Notice. In my classes, I talk a lot about the dazzling wonderment of our limbs. It took us a long time for us to learn how to move our limbs properly, to get them to go to the right place, the right speed, the right strength, to defy gravity. So it's exciting, and we tend to think more is better. I want you, for this first part of this movement series, to take your limbs out of the equation. So imagine just your torso, shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip, and it's sort of a rectangle. It's an organic rectangle. And those are the 4 points that we're going to focus on for this first part of the movement series. If you're uncomfortable, now that you've settled in, put a bolster under your knees, a pillow, blanket, support one of your shoulders, whatever you need to do to get really comfortable. In those 4 points, I want you to notice how each of them, without changing them, notice how each of them is touching the floor or not touching the floor. Just notice, don't fix, please. Is there a little bit more levitation in one of your shoulders, one of your hips? Is one of your glutes more spread or more on point? Do you notice a pattern of which points are pushing more? One shoulder, one hip, both hips, no shoulders. Just notice. This is what you're bringing to the floor or the table. So whatever this pattern is between these 4 points, it has served you, it has done things for you, and it is just not able to quite let go and come back into the field of gravity and release. It's still working. So let's give that pattern and the patterns that you're unaware of a break. You can always bend your knees. You can keep them straight, your legs straight. It's completely up to you. You can change as you go forward. Start at the very basic right shoulder. So in your right shoulder, notice the amount of pressure you have against the floor. Start to press your right shoulder towards and through the floor. Now the floor will stop you, but allow the rest of your body to do what it needs to do to continue pressure with comfort into the floor. And as you do that, notice how your whole torso shifts and changes. Pause and breathe. You're still pressing. And then press less. Press less. Press less. And as you do that, things start to settle and spread and reorganize. And at the end, sometimes you may think you're finished, but just very, very subtle, give it a little shimmy to make sure you're done. When you feel ready, press your right shoulder down again, repeat that. And as you do, notice what you can do to allow the rest of your torso to adapt, because the floor will only let you go so far. Notice how your body moves, breathe, hold that pressure for a split second, and then very, very slowly allow that to release with control. I like press less because it is an action. Sometimes it's hard to tell when you're finished, so barely a little lift towards the ceiling or a little shimmy and rest. And make sure you're resting everything, not just your shoulder. Do that at least one more time, pressing back. Each time you do it, you will learn new ways to do it better, more efficiently, find more global movement through your body, allowing your head and neck to move, your torso and your arms to move. Don't be frozen anywhere. Let your body facilitate that. Press less and slowly allow things to spread and settle and come back to neutral. For advanced students, you may have noticed that your whole soma or your body moved when you did this. Others will be more focused, and that hopefully that awareness will grow. Just notice how you feel. Now, bringing your attention down to your right hip or glute, whatever part of your right lower corner is touching the floor, that's what we're talking about. And that's in your torso and your pelvis. Now press your right glute down, make sure you're careful and gentle, and start to learn by doing through experience. How do I do this? What can I do to make it better? Is that enough? Going into it, trusting your inner expert, you know best. Breathe. And then very slowly press less. press less, and the rest of your body will follow that movement. When you're done, there'll be part of you that'll probably still be pressing. Just give your glute and hip a little shimmy, lift it a centimeter off the floor and let it rest. And then do that 3 more times at your own pace, and notice how each time you get a little better. You become more savvy. You're learning. Pushing down. Notice what your body's doing. Stay in the moment as much as you can. The top of the movement, find your way home. Find your new neutral. And don't forget that complete release. That is really important. We'll talk about that a little later. One more time. If you've done 3, you can rest. Press your right hip down. You've learned from doing it 3 times, so it'll be a whole new movement. Let your head, your arms, and anything that needs to slightly move or roll or shift, move to facilitate that movement, and breathe. Pause for a moment. Let everything rest. And notice what I like to call the echo of the movement. Notice that what's changed since you first started with your right shoulder, your left hip. You remember you can always bend your knees or straighten your knees as you need to. Just notice. Now let's shift across to your left hip, left glute, left hemipelvis, and when you're ready, start to press that down into the ground. Sometimes it's awkward. Think of how awkward it was to first deal with gravity when we first were born. You had to do and learn. Now, as adults, we like to know before we go. I like to go before you know. Go into the movement. When you're ready, slowly release. Pressing less. Pressing less. Pressing less. And let that fade out and release to neutral. Now you've learned a lot from that first movement. Let's do it again in a new way. So press down. You already have some information. You already have some experience under your belt, so this should be new. Pressing down, keep breathing. Letting your head and neck be soft, your arms, your legs. Let your left hip drive the movement and the rest of your body facilitate that. Breathe. Press less and slowly release back to your new neutral. That new is important. Do at least 3. On your last one, you're somewhat of an expert now. You've learned a lot pressing down with your left hip, glute, hemipelvis pressing. Allow more of your body to do more of what it's doing to facilitate that, as long as it's not uncomfortable. Keep breathing and slowly let that come back to your new neutral. Always finish with a little shimmy or release in that spot so you know that you're done. There's a part of our motor plan that is ready for action, which is good because we need it to be ready. But when we're resetting resting length, we want to bring it as close to neutral as possible with our skeletal muscles. Notice for a moment. This is you, the expert, your soma, checking in to see what's changed. And then when you feel ready, move your attention up to your left shoulder. Let all the other points release. Focus the spotlight on your left shoulder and start pressing backwards into the floor. There's no way to know how to do this until you start. So start and experience. Notice. pressing less, taking your time, and allow your body to reset back to neutral. Keep checking in to make sure you're comfortable. If you need any blankets or pillows or supports. Support and self-care is a constant activity. Sometimes we put off self-care for years. This office chair is perfect, except for that one thing. And then we never get a new one and we end up having a problem. So noticing and making changes when you can is great. 2 more times if you haven't done it. Pressing your left shoulder back, learning the movement in a new way. Arms, head, and legs are allowed to move based on your left shoulder. Spine twisting, arching, jaw released, eyes released. Let yourself go into the movement and slowly release back to neutral. Once you've done 3, rest your arms by your sides. Bend or straighten your legs, shift your arms, check your pillow, whatever you need, and notice. Are you the same soma that you were when you first checked in? Do you notice a difference? It could be an awareness. It could be a presence. It could be a comfort. It could be a discomfort, noticing something for the first time or in a new way. Notice that. Each movement you just did, most of you know what your somatic center is. It's the space between the bottom part of your rib cage in the front and your pelvis or your pubic bone in the front. And then your lower rib cage in the back and the top of your sacrum and your iliac crest in the back. So it's that space that we affectionately call the midsection. It's kind of soft on me, but that space that's not covered by ribs, it's not covered by your pelvis, so it's open. Our somatic center is 3-dimensional, and it's all the way through us. So one way to see how these movements can greatly affect your somatic center is to rest one of your hands somewhere in that space between your ribs and your pelvis in the front, your belly area. But make sure that you're not reaching. Make sure your elbow can rest on the floor or on a pillow. Don't reach your arm and hold it there the whole time, because that can be pretty stressful. So just let your elbow rest. Let your hand rest where it can. It's said that 1/3 of our neurons are in our hands. So 1/3 of our brain's focus throughout the day is on these 2 wonderful things that we've developed and evolved into. Your hand, by being on your belly, can be like a spotlight, because if you're feeling proprioceptively from within yourself, that's one way. But if you're touching yourself, you're now also tactily touching yourself with your hand and bringing even more information. So you can try it with or without throughout the movements. So think of your somatic center and start to notice how your somatic center changes throughout these movements. You're not going to be moving your hand. Your body or your torso will be moving your hand for you, or your hands. So when you're ready, let's go through these movements in a new way. Pressing your right shoulder back into the floor. You've all become experts at this. Keep pressing and notice how your center shifts. Does it tilt forward? Does it tilt back? Does it twist? Does it raise? Does it lower? Pause and breathe. And then follow the movement from your center. So as you press less with your shoulder, notice how your body changes and your somatic center under your hand. Some of you may notice a big movement. Your hand is staying somewhat stable on your belly and moving with your belly and your torso. So when you're ready, press your right hip back. Focus on just your right hip. And as you're pressing back with your right hip and glute, pelvis, Notice your somatic center shift, tilt, twist, raise, lower, and slowly let that release by pressing less with your right hip. Make sure you let everything settle, even though we're going a little bit more clearly through the movements. Finish each movement, pressing your left hip down. And as you do, where does your hand move based on your new movement? How does your somatic center shift? And slowly press less and allow that to release back to neutral. I encourage you to go slowly, but if you do get ahead of me, it's okay. Just try and slow it down over time. Let everything rest, pressing your left shoulder back into the floor, allowing your head to soften, your neck, your arms, your legs. And as you do more of that movement, your left shoulder pressing back, notice your somatic center move and shift in space. Pressing less with your left shoulder and coming back to neutral. Bringing your hand to the side this time. Let's do it proprioceptively and notice the difference now that you're well aware of where your center is. Press your left shoulder down. Let the rest of your body and those 4 points or 3 points that are left move as they need to. Pressing back. Feel it go through your whole body. It seems like a simple movement. It is not. Slowly press less. Moving down to your left hip, pressing down, noticing how your belly and your lower back and your midsection shift as you do this movement. Pressing less, coming back to neutral. Sliding over to your right hip, hemipelvis, pressing back. Notice your center. Does it go where you think it would go? Are you trying to control it? Are you allowing it to do what it needs to do as you do this movement? Pressing less and allow that to come back to neutral. Moving up to your right shoulder, pressing your right shoulder blade and shoulder back. Let your other 3 points go loose and follow your right shoulder's lead. Facilitate the pressing of your right shoulder, slowly pressing less, and allow that to release, noticing your center shifting back to neutral. Now that you're all really present with your somatic center, make sure your hands are by your sides, because as soon as you touch your body, it'll bring your brain's attention to those points. Pause. Now, think and focus, well, become aware of your somatic center without touching it. And from that place, so just before a movement, it's said that the motor plan is already ready to do the movement. It's preparing your body, it's preparing your muscles, bringing energy to that area because you are ready to do the movement. So in that, there is a part of you that is already starting the movement when you think about it, before you even move. Think about your somatic center, drop into your somatic center, and try and do each of these movements really slowly and see how quickly your somatic center comes online. So pressing your right shoulder, notice how quickly your center moves. Letting that release. Make these micro movements, small movements, switching down to your right hip when you're finished with that. Just barely start to press and notice how immediately your somatic center moves. And if you don't feel that, that's okay. A lot of times that's an awareness piece. It takes time. Let that release. Pause for a moment, stay still, and then press your left hip and immediately notice your somatic center, your midsection. And then press less. Switching up to your left shoulder when you're finished. Pause, become neutral as much as you can, and then start to press your left shoulder and notice your center. Let that release back to neutral. Staying as aware as you can of your somatic center. Remember to bend your knees, bring your arms by your sides, change your support if you need to, and you can always take a break. Straighten your arms and legs for a moment or keep them bent and notice what's changed. One of the gifts of HANA Somatics, it is not about me on the outside noticing what you need to do, although I can point to you and help you notice things. It is truly about giving you the power to feel and experience your birthright from within. So notice what's changed. It could be as simple as breathing, your mood. Sometimes the light is brighter in the room. Actual sensation of your body against the floor. Once you've checked in, bend your knees or keep your legs straight. It's up to you. And when you're ready, let's start to bring in some coordination, a little bit more advanced than what we've been doing. So with your arms by your sides, staying somewhat focused on your somatic center as a point of reference, start to press your right shoulder and your left glute. So this is a diagonal pressure, right shoulder, left hip, right shoulder, left hemipelvis. Notice as you press what happens to your soma. Keep breathing. Advanced students noticing where you're activating muscles and where it seems kind of quiet. And then gently press less. Resist gravity less and allow gravity to bring you back down under your control. When you settle, it'll be a whole new experience. So just come back to that very gentle shimmy and go through it a few more times. Notice which one you start with. Bring your right shoulder and left hip into the floor. Notice which one likes that more. Which one's better at it? Are they both really good? Are they both struggling? Advanced students notice your right hip and your left shoulder and what they're doing. And then press less with your right shoulder and left hip. And as you do, allow your soma and your torso to come back to neutral. So now you have a lot of information on how to do this, what worked, what didn't. Press your right shoulder back, press your left hip back. And as you press back with your right shoulder and left hip, advanced students may want to slightly lift their right hip and their left shoulder, just a centimeter. Notice that contralateral movement. Press less with your right shoulder and your left hip, and allow yourself to settle back into your new neutral. Make sure you're still taking care of yourself, taking breaks as you need to. When you're ready, switching to your right hip and your left shoulder. So the opposite diagonal, press your right hip and your left shoulder back. Notice how they behave. You're telling or you're asking them to do something. Are they doing it? Are you able to adapt as you do the movement? Notice how wonderful it is to learn as you do something. It is a gift of being human. Breathe and very slowly press less. And slowly allow yourself to come out of that diagonal contraction. Come back to neutral. Now, those of you who have forgotten, remember your legs and arms and head don't have to be frozen. You're not just doing your torso, but we're focusing on your torso. Pressing your left shoulder and right hip back, allow your head and arms and legs to do what they want to do. It may be subtle, but notice how by allowing them to do what they want to do, the movement changes. That's part of how our mind can limit our movement. We think we're doing it the right way. We're limiting ourselves based on what we've seen, mirror neurons, what we've read, and we're not allowing direct experience. Come back to neutral and let that rest. Do at least 3, one more time on your right hip and left shoulder. Advanced students, as you do this last one, slightly levitate your right shoulder and your left hip just a bit. You'll feel that contralateral twist. And slowly press less with your right hip and left shoulder and allow yourself to come out of that diagonal movement. Now start to go back and forth and play with your somatic center. So once everything rests, press your right shoulder and your left hip and notice how your center moves. That's that midsection between your pelvis and your ribs. Notice what it does. Allow it to do more of what it wants to do as long as it's not uncomfortable. Come out of that with control. Find neutral, let it go back to neutral, and then switch right hip and left shoulder. Where does your somatic center go? And are you focusing on the front of your somatic center or the back, the sides? Notice whatever draws your attention, pressing less and coming back to neutral. There's a gift in moving towards an immovable object. It lets us be stopped where we think we want to move and brings us into a movement that's already happening that we're unaware of. I find myself to be somewhat unaware of what happens in my torso and my pelvis, where I'm more excited to notice my limbs. I don't know if that's the same for you, but bringing yourself back to the center is really important because these things are happening as you're doing your larger movements with your limbs. We just don't pay attention to them. It's the responsible parent or grandparent, that center that supports us. Bring your arms by your side, straighten your legs, see if anything new appears, if anything has disappeared or changed. One of the beauties of this series is you can do this against a chair, on a plane, in bed. You can do it in water when you're swimming. You can do it standing. You can start to work with these 4 points. They're really powerful. When you don't have a lot of room, it's a wonderful way to work. Let's do a little one that can be a little bit more challenging. Bend your knees or keep your legs straight. It's up to you based on your comfort. And when you're ready, we're going to do what I affectionately call the log roll. Now be gentle with yourself. Sometimes there's a part of us that likes to say we're not doing it right or I should be doing it better. Let it be an experience. So pressing your right shoulder and your right hip back at the same time. How do you do that? Focus on the pressing part versus anything else, but allow your body to do what it needs to do to facilitate that and breathe. And then press less into your right shoulder and your right hemipelvis and feel yourself come back to neutral. Now that you've done it once, think about your somatic center and press your right shoulder and your right hip back into the floor. It will be a movement that's different than the first one. You've learned, you're doing it more efficiently, and you're learning as I'm talking to you. Press, breathe, and then control that by pressing less, pressing less. pressing less. Let it fade out and then try and find that gentle release to neutral. One more time. Now you're kind of an expert. Notice as you press your right hip and right shoulder down, allow your head and neck and arms to do what they need to do, and notice how the movement can grow. How does your center move? And if you don't notice your center on the way up, it's nice to notice it on the way down. So press less with your right shoulder and right hip, and notice the journey back to neutral. This is a really safe and comfortable series you can do anytime. Let's switch over to your other side now. This is the freshman side, so be gentle, get started, and press your left hip and left shoulder, and you'll learn some of what you did on the other side and bring it over to that hemisphere. Pressing, allowing your center, arms and legs, and then press less. And notice the journey back home. Don't let it be a blur. Don't leave. Stay present with what you notice all the way back to that conscious release. Okay, you've done it once, you can do it twice and even better. Left shoulder and left hip, pressing down, pressing down. Let the rest of your body give and shift, even though it's not what you may think it should be doing. Let it do its thing. Let it be organic and breathe. Pressing less, coming back to neutral. Now you're verging on expert, or what I like to call expert beginner. Left shoulder and left hip, pressing down, pressing down, pressing down. Really allow your arms and your legs, your head, your eyes, your jaw to go into that movement. It is not just your left shoulder and left hip. It is your whole soma. All for one, one for all. Slowly release, pressing less, pressing less, pressing less. And if you can't quite tell if you're done, just give it a little shimmy, little release, and rest. Check in one more time just to see what's shifted and changed. As you do your movements at home and when you're alone, you can check at the beginning and end of your movement series. You can do it after each movement set. You can do it in between each movement. You can do it while you're moving. It all depends on how aware you are that day and where your focus is. Stay in direct experience as much as you can. Notice how much change just from moving a few inches. Think of how much of our stabilization in our life of sitting and standing and even sleeping sometimes is a slight holding, a slight twist, a slight shoulder being forward an inch that can cause so many problems throughout our body, somatically and at our somatic center. So going into these deep movements at our center are really important. Let's do something that I love to do, which I discovered a few years ago in my own body, which is, again, prepare yourself with your legs either straight or bent. In the beginning, I called this morphing, but basically what it is it's going through your torso. We're so good at going away or forward or backward. What I'd like you to do is start to think about how would you get your right shoulder to go through your torso to your left hip, not above, not below. Start to draw it through your body as if there was a string tied between your right shoulder and your right hip through your torso. Find out how to do that movement in comfort, bringing your shoulder through your torso to your left hip, and even drawing your left hip through your torso to your right shoulder. They're both tied together. Let them do their movement. Breathe. And then slowly let that string lengthen and allow them to move away from each other. Okay, you're cramped into a seat on a plane and you're slightly twisted and turned, or your posture's off a little bit. This kind of movement can be held for hours. Bring your right shoulder through your torso diagonally through towards your left hip, and bring your left hip through your torso towards your right shoulder. Let the rest of your body do what it needs to do. It may not be what you think it needs to do, but just start to find your way. Breathing. Pause when you get to the top of that before discomfort, and then very slowly allow that to release. And you'll feel yourself settle in a new way. Notice the echo of what you're doing. Feel it after each movement. These movements can be really delicious, and it's like squeezing the tension out and releasing to neutral, bringing your right shoulder through your body to your left hip. And as you start on this journey, along that string, is there any place where it's not fully moving into the movement? Are you doing it really well in a certain area, but maybe not another? Try and let the string be equal all the way through. In tension, contraction, consistency. Breathe. And then a little bit less, and allow that to lengthen back to neutral. Do a quick brief check-in, notice, and then switch to the other side, right hip and left shoulder. No, this is going to be new. It's going to be an experience. Bring your left shoulder through your torso, not necessarily above or below, and bring your right hip and hip joint through your torso to your left shoulder. Find out where it's blocked. Find out where it's not active. Find out where you could add more of your attention. Keep breathing. At the top of the movement, soften and allow gravity in your body to settle back to neutral. Do that 2 more times on your own, left shoulder and right hip. Teaching yourself what works for you. And challenging yourself to wake up those areas that are in sensory motor amnesia, not quite under your control yet. When you finish your 3 movements, pause for a moment and rest, and notice what you feel. This time, when you're ready, bring your right shoulder through your torso to your right hip. This will be like a side flexion or side bend, but it's closer to your center. Think of that string being tied through your torso from your right shoulder to your right hip, and go into that contraction with control and breathe. Allowing your left side to soften as much as you can be aware of. Slowly let that string lengthen through your right side, coming back to neutral. 2 more times, bringing a right shoulder through your torso to your right hip. The more you tighten that string on the right, the more you soften and release the left side, so your right side can do what it needs to do. It's not being held back. Soften and let that lengthen. Once you've done 2 or 3 of those movements, switch to your left side. Let everything rest on your right for a moment. Let it finish. And then left hip through your torso to your left shoulder, contracting through your torso. It's going to be a very, very centralized side flexion. Let your right side go soft and neutral while you're doing this. Slowly come out of that contraction. Do at least 3 on your left side. And as you're doing it, you may notice, does your shoulder go more towards the ceiling or the floor? Does your hip go more towards the ceiling or the floor? That tells you about your pattern. Does that movement pull your shoulder forward or backward more? You don't have to change it. And your hip, does it pull it more into the floor or towards the ceiling? And then let that release. This is revealing your pattern through movement. Go ahead and slide your legs long, rest for a moment. Notice what you feel with your arms by your sides. First large class I ever taught, I asked for feedback at the end, and this woman was in complete awe, and she said, I don't know how you do it, but the floor got softer. So one of the things about these movements is there are many times that we are still acting, levitating, contracting, and holding on to things even when we don't need to. So when you lay down and you can meet the floor more comfortably, it seems that the external world has changed. So notice what you feel. Now, bringing these 4 points into some of the movements you already know, we're going to go into a little bit of arch and flatten with a new twist. So bend your knees, feet flat on the floor and comfortable. Before you start, it's always good to get a lay of the land. Now, we've done a little bit of pre-work with all this, so it probably won't be as clear as it would have been if we had started in the beginning. But just very gently roll your pelvis forward and roll it back towards your toes, towards your nose, and just let it be playful. Don't control it, just bring it up, let it go. Bring it down towards your toes, rock it forward, rock it back, whichever visual works for you. Now, because you're a little bit more focused right now, you may notice which way is easier. One, it tends to feel like it's greased, it's a water slide, it just wants to go there. And then the other one feels like it takes a little effort. So notice which one is easier for you. So that's awareness number 1. That tells you about, or that reveals your pattern. Whichever one is easier is typically the tighter side, and it's good to start with that movement. So I'm going to teach this in one direction, but I want you, those of you who it's easier to arch, I want you to do that one 3 times first. And those of you who it's easier to flatten, I want you to do that one first. So when you're ready, I'm going to teach it with flatten first. You do what you need to do. Go ahead and flatten your lower back. And when you're doing that, and lower back is above your bum and below your rib cage, your abdominal muscles are actually getting tight. That's what's driving the movement. So your zipper's going to your nose, your ribs are going to your toes. Breathe. As you slowly release your abdominal muscles, you'll feel your back soften out of the floor and your pelvis will rock to neutral. Let it go to neutral. So you do that 3 times for flatten people, and for arch people, start to stick your belly out. And I tend to think of like the cowboy belly, like over the belt buckle. So you want to go to your low belly. And I tend to think of my zipper tilting towards my toes, my lower back arches. And with this movement, it's actually shortening my lower back muscles, which is making the lower back, or my lower back, arch and my belly spill forward. And then do a little bit less, and you'll start to feel your belly and your center come back towards the floor. Your pelvis will rock, and your lower back will get a little bit closer to the floor. Once you've done your 3 in your favorite direction for today, go back and forth a few times. So alternate, do 1 flatten and then 1 arch, always completely stopping and coming to neutral between each movement. So at the end of an arch, let it come back to wiggle. At the end of a flatten, let it come back with a shimmy. Make sure you're comfortable. So as a human being, my awareness tends to be limited in some ways. It's focused like a spotlight. So right now, each of our spotlights is in a different place. We're noticing certain things, expanding and broadening and opening that spotlight up to new awarenesses is really important. So we're noticing arching and flattening our abdominal muscles, our lower back muscles. When you've done at least 2 of each, pause and rest with your arms by your sides, your knees are still bent. Anyone has had their car when it's out of alignment, they know that it pulls to the left or pulls to the right. Our pelvis and the rest of our body can do that as well. So think of a point on your pelvis that's touching the floor right now in the back, your sacrum, base of your spine. Find that point. It's going to be different for everybody. Don't make it center. Let it be wherever it is. That point is going to be drawing a line. So as you go into your arch and flatten, where does that point go? Does it pull to the left when you arch? Does it pull to the right when you flatten? Notice which way your pelvis wants to slightly pull, left or right. Some of you may notice it as more pressure in one of your glutes as you go into your arch. There's more pressure on the left or the right. There's a twisting. If you don't notice this, it's okay. Start to do this on your own, and there will be days where it will be very clear and some days where you just don't notice it, and that's fine. But this pulling can tell us a lot about how our pelvis is twisted, how it's slightly out of alignment. With somatics, at least the way I teach it, you go into the pattern first. So don't make it straight. Don't fix it. Don't be linear. Let it go where it wants to go. If it wants to pull left, let it go left. Let it be juicy. Let it go into that pattern and then come out of that movement. If you press back and flatten and you don't notice anything, that's fine. Let it do it at once. It may reveal itself as you move. Now expanding that, pulling, remember your 4 points. Notice how each arch and flatten changes all of your 4 points, not just your hips. So as you arch, where does your pressure go on your shoulders? Is it one more than the other? Don't fix it. Let it be true. Let it be honest. And then as you release your arch, find your way back home. As you go into your flatten, what happens with your 4 points? Do some of them lift? Do some of them press? Notice the imbalance. That is your learned pattern, or at least what you're aware of in this moment. And slowly let that release to neutral. Remember, go before you know. So just go through the movements more playfully and notice how your 4 points shift and how they change to help you do your arch and flatten. Not Thomas Hannah's, not Susan's, not mine, your arch and flatten with where you are today. It's special, it's unique, and it will never be the same, even from movement to movement. So we broadened your awareness from a simple arch and flatten, noticing your arch and flatten, your 2 points, then your 4 points. So it's starting to spread that spotlight and getting larger and larger. When you're ready, Put your hands behind your head. If you need to take a break, you're welcome to, keeping your knees somewhat bent. Focusing on your midsection, your somatic center, and your 4 points. Start to go through arch and curl. So gently press your lower back down, tuck your chin towards your neck, support your head, lift your elbows, and come into a contraction into your anterior muscles and breathe. Notice your 4 points, slowly releasing, breathing normally. And as you do, notice how your 4 points press or lift or settle down in a different order, coming back to neutral. All of this is information that you can use. Don't get overwhelmed. Just notice. What I typically do is I think of more of what's changing rather than how to change it. Stick your belly out, tilt your head back behind you, press your elbows back, and think of yawning at the edge of your bed. You arch your back, you press your elbows back, you tilt your head back, breathe. And then very slowly notice your 4 points. As you're releasing out of that, how do they behave? Don't change them. Notice what they're telling you. Your body will always tell you the truth. Your mind will get in the way and try and change it. Go back and forth slightly into your curl, noticing your 4 points. Contracting less to come out of that, always coming back to shimmy or neutral. Finishing each movement. Think of your arch as kind of that beautiful arch. Stick your belly, your heart goes towards the ceiling. Use your hands under your neck to kind of tilt your head back into your hands a little bit. Press your elbows back. Let it be twisty and organic. Breathe. And slowly come out of that with control. Go back and forth at your own pace, making each movement smaller. People love to do a big contraction forward, but we don't typically sit with our heads and our bellies. So think of the way you sit throughout the day when you're comfortable or slouching. Use the weight of your arms to release your chest and your pecs and your shoulders. A few more times, each one becoming more organic and smaller, closer to the floor, less distance. Movements that you could do if you were in a plane where you only have a very small room or small space to move in. Finish the movement you're on in your own time. Don't hurry. And we're going to do just a few arch and crosses. So if you need to take a break, take a break. If not, put your right hand behind your head, your neck, with your elbow bent out to the side, your left arm straight or comfortably by your side. So this is a diagonal movement. This is going to play again with your 4 points. Notice what you've learned in your smaller movement. So bringing your right elbow and your left knee forward towards the ceiling and towards each other. Notice how your 4 points respond or don't respond. Your left foot will lift off the floor. Your left hip can lift off the floor. Make it comfortable and breathe, breathe, breathe. Now control the descent. This is where you're using load to lengthen those muscles. Notice where your 4 points are responding, how they're connecting. Turning your head to the right, pressing your right shoulder back into the ground, which you did a bunch of times today, so do that again. Press your left hip down into the ground. Let your left knee wander out a little bit if you want. And think of that diagonal going under your back between your right shoulder and your left hip. Diagonal under your back. Stick your heart to the ceiling, breathe. And then press less with your left hip and your right shoulder. Notice your 4 points coming back to neutral. Alternate back and forth a few times, right elbow and right knee forward towards the ceiling. Lift that left cheek up if you can, right shoulder up if you can, breathe. Now, when you're here, press your right hip and your left shoulder more into the ground and notice how it supports the lifting of your left hip and your right shoulder. Slowly releasing your right shoulder and left hip down, you can press less into the 2 points that were touching the ground the whole time. Contralateral. You were already doing it, and now you're becoming aware of it. One more time in the other direction, turning your head to the right, press your right shoulder into the ground and slide your shoulder blade under your back. Press your left hip into the ground. Let your left leg wander out a little bit. It'll help you bring your left hip under a little bit. Stick your heart and your belly to the ceiling to make room for your shoulder and hip to find each other. And then press less into your right shoulder and left hip and let your body settle and sink and come back to neutral. Bring your right arm by your side, your left hand behind your head. There's a part of you that knows what you're about to do. Let that part of you do its thing, but keep it in check by knowing that this is a totally different experience this time. Bring your left elbow and your right hip and your right knee forward towards the ceiling. Think of your right hip crease and your left armpit trying to get closer. Knees and elbows can deceive us. Think of your torso, the 4 points. Press your right shoulder and your left hip more into the floor to develop that and breathe. Pressing less with your right shoulder and left hip, lowering your right hip and left shoulder. Coming back to neutral. Turning your head to the left, pressing your left shoulder back and sliding your left shoulder under you. Pressing your right glute into the floor, letting your right knee wander out a little bit. Reach the center of your sternum towards the ceiling so that there is space, like a tunnel, for your right hip and left shoulder to meet each other underneath you. Breathe. Slowly let that release back to neutral. Leading with your right hip crease and your left armpit, your arm and leg are coming along for the ride, so bring them both forward. Think of the 2 points, right hip and left shoulder. Press your right shoulder and left hip into the ground to support you and breathe. And let them all unwind as one, lowering your right hip and left shoulder and pressing less with your right shoulder and left hip. It's a crisscross applesauce movement. When you're ready, turn your head to the left. Press your left shoulder down, press your right hip down. And as you're pressing your right hip and left shoulder down, slightly lift your left hip and right shoulder towards the ceiling. Feel that opposite twist, 4 points. Slowly releasing out of that by lifting your right shoulder and left hip less and releasing across your back. I encourage you to slide one leg long at a time to give yourself time to adjust. Don't just straighten your legs out midair and levitate them. Just slide them. It's going to be messy. It's going to catch your socks a little bit, but just take your time and slide your legs long. Those of you who had bolsters, move them out of the way for a moment. Those who had pillows, move them out of the way for a moment and just check in. What this does, it's not that laying flat is the goal. It'd be great. The goal is, has it changed? So if you get to the floor and flat and it doesn't feel quite right, put another bolster in there, maybe a smaller one. You're assessing as you go. You are an organism that is changing and adapting all the time. The closer to the present and direct experience that you can be, the clearer it is what to do with these tools. Not where to look outside yourself, but what to do now. What am I feeling? What can I do about it? Remember how you felt when you started. I tend to revert to what's touching and what's not, because that's clear for me and direct. Then I tend to go into mood. Am I happier? Do I feel lighter? Is there a shift? As soon as I say the B word, you're all going to probably change the way you're doing it, but just notice your natural breath pouring into your chest and leaving you. Has the quality of that movement, that breathing changed? And then the exciting part, which we usually focus on, is, do I still hurt? Has my sensation of comfort or discomfort changed? From this wonderful place of your new soma, and I don't say that lightly, I don't say it just because I've heard it or read it. I've experienced it personally, and so will you, or you are right now. You are not the same soma you were an hour and 15 minutes ago. Be your own expert and slowly roll to one side and make it comfortable. It's a Saturday, there's no hurry. Just roll there, support your head, and notice how you feel. Pause and stay focused internally. Get a sense of what's changed. How did I move? And it's not always what we expected. Sometimes we notice a new discomfort, but that's a gift because now we know what to do next. Pain and discomfort are messengers telling us what we need and where we're stuck. Pushing yourself slowly up to seated, take your time, face away from the camera so you're focusing internally. Notice how you feel. If sitting on the floor is not comfortable, you can make your way to standing or a chair. Make sure you're supported. Take a little 5-second stroll through your house around your room. And when you come back, we'll have a little bit of time to discuss and talk about the class. Those of you who leave, that's okay. It's good to see you in class today. There's no need to stay unless you want to, but we'd love to have you for this discussion. So thank you, Susan, for this opportunity and for all of you who are here to experience my class.